Hi friends, my name is host Eric. I'm host talking with famous people, and I'm also a debate coach, and have been for quite a while. Professional flow debate coach. If there's somebody from the debate community who happens to watch this video because of the title or something, this will cover all the debate relevant topics on fiat, but it'll also cover a little bit more than that, and hopefully you enjoy it. It's also worth noting before I begin that this video is primarily intended for people who are not in the debate community, because I've got a lot of very smart people who are members of the community who I think like to have some of these concepts explained, and whom I think can benefit from them because they're that kind of thinkers. Anyhow, let's go over the topic. Fiat is a word that means make it so, essentially. I think that's what it means, something like that. It's Roman or something, where back then the emperors would just say fiat. Something means to just say, we do it because I say so. In other words, it's a indication that action is taken without justification. And so when we're in formal debate, competition debate, but also in any other kind of argumentational conflict between two people, there's going to be fiat is always there. And part of the reason for this is that linguistically, every kind of expression in English or in any language has some implicits behind it. So anytime you make a statement like oranges are the best, the implicit behind it is I believe. Whereas get me some milk, the implicit behind it is you should or you must, depending on the circumstances. So as far as those implicits go, fiat, if you say if we pass advocacy X, then the following things will happen. You're saying, pretend we pass advocacy X, and the following things will happen. It's that pretend part that's fiat. So, in order to impact any prospective advocacy, we have to imagine what's known as the AF world. So let's say you're arguing on the internet about Trump, and you or somebody else says something along the lines of, if Trump gets elected to a second term, we're really in trouble. Now, in that instance, he's saying, if the following advocacy is undertaken, the following impacts will occur. And if that's the start of the conversation, then that's going to define the AF, who's affirming something. And that affirmation, it would probably be best phrased in some sort of positivist phrasing as, people should not vote for Trump. Or people should vote for someone other than Trump. I guess is the best way to put it. People should vote for someone other than Trump, or, that'd be the easiest way to debate it, because you don't need to include the fact that they could abstain. So, if that would then be define what the affirmative is. That's the resolution that's being debated then at that point. If you're on the other side of it, you'd say, okay, well, why would we be in trouble? And then the AF would give you some reasons. Well, the following thing will happen if Trump's reelected. The economy will go down, and people will lose their jobs, and whatever. Those are what are known as post-fiat impacts, because they happen after the affirmative says, pretend Trump's elected for a second time. And then they goes, okay, let's pretend. What's going to happen? So the pretend part being the fiat, it means the neg is not arguing, no, I'm not going to talk about what's going to happen when Trump gets elected, because I think it's not going to be him. So first let's have the argument about who's going to get elected. that might be something that happens. But by and large, people naturally and comfortably fall into this phenomenon of fiat without even thinking about it. So, no matter what kind of argument you're doing, whether it's a formal debate or not, in formal debate, we talk about fiat as a factor in argumentation, but fiat occurs in every debate, regardless of whether it's formal or not, every argument, whether it's formal or not, because if those arguments are, at least if they're advocating some sort of change to the status quo, then necessarily you're going to fiat that change to figure out what the impacts are. You're going to create an AF world. We should go to Taco Bell instead of McDonald's is an AF advocacy. And if you say why, they'll say Taco Bell has more healthy food, let's say. Well, what they're really saying is in the AF world, we eat healthier food than in the neg world. Now, note that if in fact it turns out that we don't go there, then we never actually realized those impacts. They were just hypothetical impacts because they were after fiat. We're just pretending that we go to Taco Bell and we get food there. Well, what are we going to get? We're going to get healthier food. Therefore, it's preferable because presumably we'll be healthier people. So we're going to have some sort of healthy impact if we go to Taco Bell versus whatever else. Okay. So that explains somewhat about what fiat means in debate, and specifically about the AF world and the neg world. So if the AF world is the world of post-fiat impacts, namely the AF, we pretend the AF's been passed as an advocacy and move forward on it and see how the world would look different. So the AF world is the world of post-fiat impacts. The neg world is the world of the status quo. So the neg inherently defends the status quo to reject the AF. No, we should not do your AF. It's the same thing as saying we should retain the status quo. Now, it is possible, of course, to run a counterplan in Lincoln Douglas and policy debate and in real life, but there's a rather complicated metric for understanding when and how and where a counterplan actually negates. And in Lincoln Douglas, for example, you might be able to win around with it, but you'd be pulling some BS past people. So a counterplan is a topic for another day, and I don't want to get into it. But for the beginning, or for the default sort of thinking about the matter, it's best to think of neg's job as defending the status quo, which means preventing the AF from affirming. You prevent the AF from affirming, then we retain the status quo as far as post-fiat goes. Now, at that point, it would be like post-round, we retain the status quo. So fiat says, well, we didn't do the thing, so we retain the status quo. What's next? Let me gather my thoughts for a second. Okay, so, of course, there's another kind of impacts then. If there's post-fiat impacts, that is to say, the impacts after fiat occurs, the AF world, there must be pre-fiat impacts, and yes, there are. Pre-fiat impacts refer to arguments that are either theory arguments or critiques, usually, that impact in some way prior to when the AF says, let's pretend. Let's pretend we passed my legislation that says everybody has to throw away their hats by Tuesday. And, okay, let's pretend that. Everybody has to throw away their hats by Tuesday. Well, this happens before they say, let's pretend that. So, what I mean by before is the pre-fiat impacts are those impacts that subsume the questions of post-fiat impacts. If, in fact, we're adjudicating the round on what happens prior to the application of fiat by the AF, then we are talking about matters that are either definitional or ground matters, or some sort of impact that's presumed to subsume the post-fiat impacts in terms of significance or being voters or whatever. Let me give some examples because I know that's not very clear. That's kind of a big mush of debate jargon. But with examples that should clear it up pretty easily. Pre-fiat is to say, like, let's say in the question about throwing the hats away, if I'm the neg and the opponent is saying yes, we should throw all the hats away by Tuesday, and they claim as one of their benefits or impacts that less clutter will result in less clutter from hats. That because you're throwing the hats away, you'll also end up throwing your scarves away, and that will double the positive security impacts because people will be less likely to hide their identity, less able to hide their identity, okay? So now, because of that, because your advocacy is you're saying we should get rid of all the hats because getting rid of all the hats has an impact on security, and it will also prompt people to get rid of all their scarves. So if I want to object to that by saying studies have been shown that getting rid of hats doesn't cause you to get rid of scarves, then that's arguing the point on post-fiat impacts. You're saying, no, I agree that I understand what your warrant says. You're saying that there's a sort of sympathetic response to throw away scarves when you throw away hats, even if you don't have to. So even though it's not required for you to throw away scarves, more scarves will get thrown away in the process of throwing away the hats. I get the idea of it. But what I'm asking is, but I have a study here that says that, in fact, that was believed to be true, but now it's been debunked. That, in fact, there is no sympathetic tendency to throw away scarves. That would be arguing the actual point on post-fiat impacts. Who's right? Well, my evidence says it works. My evidence is newer. It says no, that was bogus evidence. So that defeats the point. It's not the case that it's sympathetic scarf throwing away. And as a consequence, you only get the impacts from hats on security for hiding the identity. That'd be one way to approach it. There's another way to approach answering that thing, and you say, that's not topical. It doesn't matter if your evidence is right and you show that scarf throwing away happens as a corollary or something like that. Well, I mean, in that case, it would be topical. But if you make the argument that even if scarves are in fact thrown away, then the affirmative shouldn't get credit for those impacts because it's FX topical, which is to say it's an effect of an effect. It's not an impact of the affirmation, it's an impact of the affirmation's impact. And you shouldn't get infinite levels of impacts like that. Now, whether or not you should is a open question. I haven't really heard a powerful warrant for explaining why FX topicality renders things non-topical. That's getting off into a side thing. It doesn't really matter for this topic. But the point is, that is a pre-fiat argument. You're saying those impacts he's established there shouldn't matter, even though he's established them. You're not disputing that in the AF world, those impacts manifest. Those are post-fiat impacts. You're just saying, for theory reasons, your opponent shouldn't get credit for those impacts because they're non-topical. That is to say, they're not unique to the affirmation, or at least they're not directly linked to the affirmation. Regardless, that basically it doesn't matter what happens at the post-fiat level because of pre-fiat reasons. And there's other kinds of impacts that you could do that are pre-fiat, which would be things like that appeal to actual real-world impacts. For example, if I do a performance critique, then I might go into a round and say, all right, well, My opponent ran a conventional AF here. As an egg, though, I'm not going to even respond to my opponent's case. I'm just going to do some super entertaining song and dance song and keep us all super entertained. And at the end, I'm just going to make one basic argument that says, Judge, you should vote on who entertains you more, not on who wins post fiat impacts or some other thing related to my opponent's case. My opponent's presented a case, and with impacts and stuff, good for him. That's his presentation in this entertainment contest. I can entertain you more than him, and you should vote on who's more entertaining. That's a pre-fiat kind of critique. It's saying, don't care about what happens after let's pretend. Let's care about stuff that happens that's not pretend. Namely, the fact that we're all actually here. You're a judge, you're probably bored. You've been writing down an argument, you've been flowing hard, trying to keep track of everybody's argumentation chains. Stop flowing, Judge. You don't need to work hard this round. We're going to vote on pre-fiat impacts. If you do vote on pre-fiat impacts, then that doesn't mean it's not on the flow. It just means it's generally established in framework of some kind, and then links back to either the resolution, which would be like a resolutional critique you could do, or behavior of the debater, or a structural critique, like a performance case that says the whole format of debate ought to favor this other entire format for no apparent reason. Anything goes in debate, so you get those kind of arguments. Of course, they don't usually win. It's not the beautiful thing about debate is there's never been a manner of argument that's broken debate because there's always good answers for everything, given the fact that theory arguments are included. Okay, so post-fiat happens after the AF says, let's pretend we do my affirmation. Pre-fiat happens before that, metaphorically, before. Now, what happens when the neg fiats something? Neg doesn't get fiat. Neg has no fiat because neg is, remember, defending the status quo. You only get fiat when you are affirming a change to the status quo, so we can pretend you make that change and impact it accordingly. Since neg doesn't make a change to the status quo, there's no reason to afford them fiat. Now, a lot of people do run counterplans, as I indicated before. Neg does not have fiat, and so they don't get to impact that in the same way that AF impacts their advocacy, which in PF is an advocacy, and LD is an advocacy, and in policy debate is a plan. You can run plans in LD, but you shouldn't. All right, so post-fiat pre-fiat we kind of understand here, and there's basically one more area I want to cover regarding fiat before wrapping this up. So what fiat shows us about communication and talking with people and argumentation and all these kind of things is that you cannot even begin to discuss any kind of discussion, conversation, argument, or whatever you want to call it, debate, without addressing the AF-neg question. Now, a lot of times when people debate on the internet, either in comments or with me, for example, in a live stream or in some other capacity, debating with people on the internet, they just bounce around from point to point, and there's no central point that ever gets actually debated. If you want to have anything that you might remotely call a debate, there has to be a single statement that is being disputed. One side affirming it, namely saying, yes, we should do this, or change our perceptions in this way, or whatever, and the other party saying, no, we shouldn't, which is we should retain the status quo. Whether or not you're the AF or the neg has to do with what kind of burdens you have. The AF has a burden to affirm. If there's a debate resolution like squirrels should be moved to Maine, all the squirrels should be moved to Maine, and the AF gets up in the first speech and completely loses their voice, doesn't say a word, sits down. Then the neg gets up in their first speech, in the crossfire, in the cross-examination, and finds they've lost their voice too. Doesn't say a word. And for the rest of the round, both parties take turns standing up, being silent for all their speech time. At the end of the round, not a single word was said. Who wins the round? Neg wins the round because Af has the burden to affirm. Neg doesn't have to do anything if Af doesn't do anything. We negate. So, that's another reason why Neg doesn't have fiat, because they're not supposed to be affirming an alternate advocacy. They're supposed to be negating the advocacy in question. So, for people who do debate on the internet and run afoul of problems and who has the burden here, it's important to be able to stop and say, okay, hold on. What's going on here? You made this claim. I'm negating this claim. There should be a fairly limited number of back and forths until we figure out who's right or wrong about it, because it's just a simple enough claim. What's your substantiation? And then they might say something like, well, you don't have a better... Well, do you have a better explanation for it? Or, well, how... Without Mia, how would you explain Mia? And you go, well, it's not my job to explain Mia. You're the one who made the claim. If you claim that Mia causes Mia, and I say, well, but why? I mean, what your explanation for it is specious. You go, Mia causes Mia because of reason Medja. But reason Medja doesn't support the idea that Mia causes Mia at all. My train of thought here. Then they might say, well, do you have a better explanation for how Mia comes about? Point is, I'm not the one trying to explain how Mia comes about. Your explanation makes no sense. My lack of an explanation is preferable to your wrong explanation, and I'm not the one who's claiming to be able to explain it. So why are you asking me if I have a better explanation? You don't have an explanation if it's wrong. You just have a failure. And as a consequence, your failure to explain something is not going to justify substantiating or sustaining your claim. Circularly. So that's more or less all I have to say about fiat. It's an interesting notion because it does point out how in all arguments we always have to play this thing. Well, let's pretend we did do the thing you're suggesting. What would things look like? Which explains to you how in all communication where there's discourse back and forth trying to figure something out, there's always an af and an egg. And most of the sort of what we call the laity in debate, which is to say non-debaters, because they've not heard these words about af and neg and the burden associated with it, the burden to affirm that the person making a claim is the one who has the burden to substantiate it, and that if they fail to do so, we return to status quo in which the claim is not true. We assume the claim is not true, or at least we don't give it any credit for being true. And so it's critically important, if people don't want to be confused by what's going on in their conversations, don't want to be fooled by tricky sliding stuff, that they remember who's affirming, who makes the claim, and what that entails. So if somebody who's affirming something asks you a question like, well, do you have a better explanation for it? You'll know to just simply say, you're the one affirming the claim. I've negated your explanation. Therefore, you have a wrong explanation. I have nothing that you've negated. There's no explanation I've negated. I don't have a wrong explanation. Wrong explanation is worse than not a wrong explanation. So yeah, but you don't have a right explanation. At least I'm not wrong. That's better than being wrong. You're wrong. You think not having a right explanation is a problem? How about having a wrong explanation? That's obviously much more of a problem. We don't prefer to be wrong over accept our lack of explanation. Some things are not, we don't have an explanation. We don't need to have an explanation for everything. And it's better to acknowledge and be correct about not having a meaningful explanation for something that's not been meaningfully explained than it will ever be to try to explain it anyway. Or to claim that you explain it anyway. So fiat then is how we test those kind of claims. Fiat is how we test the advocacy in general. We give the advocacy a chance to pretend. And what it eliminates from the neg the opportunity to do in formal debate is the neg can't argue that'll never pass. I think we should pass this bill X. Neg says that'll never pass. I'm not saying I think this bill will pass. I'm saying I think we should do it. The normative question, whether we ought to do something, comes before the practical question, whether we will. We have to decide that, in fact, yes, it's something we ought to do. Then we find out if we will do it. Okay, so that's the argument then that the neg is precluded from making by fiat, or that fiat is implied by that reality. Because it obviously, that saying, but this bill will never pass, it doesn't respond to this question that it should, about whether or not it should pass. That implies that we have to test the question of whether or not it should pass, which suggests the app needs to have fiat in order to test it. The neg needs app to have fiat too in order to test it. Like neg uses app fiat to test app impacts, but neg can't fiat its own advocacy. Neg could run a counterplan like I indicated before, but it needs to be exclusive of the app advocacy, non-permeable in a couple of different ways. We'll go over this in another thing, but most importantly, even if it wins and the neg wins the round, at least in LD and I guess PF, it wouldn't be called a counterplan because they're technically illegal. But in LD, then the judge should say, I voted on the counterplan on the grounds that such a better option exists with this counterplan than the app advocacy, and because they're exclusive, that I'm going to vote this no so we retain the potentiality of maybe someday debating and voting on the counterplan. The counterplan did not get fiated into effect with an egg ballot. The counterplan has been sufficiently successful in convincing the judge that a preferable opportunity that's exclusive of the app advocacy exists in the status quo. That's so preferable that it's better that we not do the app advocacy, even if it's established net positive impacts, because it would remove from us our ability to execute the preferable advocacy established by the neg. And as a consequence, since the neg advocacy is so great that we should just vote no to at least preserve that opportunity, even though we're not going to do it right away. Even though doing it's not implied by it negating. So, a lot of people don't understand about counterplans. I need to make a separate video about counterplans, but that's it for now. This is been about fiat and affirming and negating and the burdens of it a little bit. I don't know what made me want to make this video right now. It's I got a tournament coming up today at Marlboro School here in LA. My kid's competing in Lincoln Douglas. And it starts super early in the morning. I'm going to end up getting no sleep because it's like my timing was off. So I got up at like 1 in the afternoon. Now it's 3:12. It's downtown LA. I'm driving from over here. And so it's going to take me like, if I leave at a normal time, like maybe 7 to get there by 8:30, I'm not going to get there. So I'm going to leave like 5. Maybe even like 4:45. I got nothing better to do. Go down there, go to Denny's, have some breakfast. Although that seems like a waste too, because like Marlboro puts out such a nice spread of food. It's crazy. If you've never debated at Marlboro School, if you're a debater or a coach or whatever, you've never been to Marlboro School for a tournament, and you're in the LA area, you're missing out. This place is swanky. Oh my God, the spread, the food, the bagels, the fruit, the different coffees, fucking yeah, You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Good job, Marlboro School. I'm looking forward to this tournament this weekend. That coach there is really good, too. The coach at Marlboro School is smart. He's as good a coach as I am. And I don't say that very often.